Welcome to Storyloft, where we offer a peaceful place to those burdened by life's challenges and to their supportive companions. Today, we share the journey of three individuals navigating the complex terrain of anxiety. Their stories, bravely told, help us remember that no one walks this path alone. Anxiety often dulls life's vibrancy, yet within each story, hope persists. At Storyloft, we acknowledge your struggles. Your fears, worries, and restless nights are all valid. Here, your experiences find a listening ear and understanding hearts. If you have a story that might resonate with others facing similar challenges, we invite you to share it at storyloft@outlook.com. Your words could be the light somebody desperately needs. As you engage with these stories, take a moment to breathe and be present. Free from judgment, you are in a safe space. If these stories touch you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us reach more individuals who may feel isolated in their struggles. Now, let's open our hearts to these three powerful stories of people confronting anxiety. Their experiences highlight our shared humanity, even in our darkest moments. Emma cradled her newborn daughter Lily in her arms, gazing down at the tiny face that should have filled her with joy. Instead, a creeping dread washed over her, threatening to drown out the soft coos and gentle breathing of her baby. The nursery, with its cheerful yellow walls and whimsical animal decals, felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. At 32 years old, Emma had always imagined motherhood would come naturally to her. She'd spent months preparing, reading every parenting book she could find, meticulously organizing the nursery and attending prenatal classes with her husband, Mark. But nothing had prepared her for the overwhelming anxiety that had gripped her since Lily's birth 6 weeks ago. Every decision, no matter how small, felt immense and fraught with the potential to end in a catastrophe. Was Lily eating enough? Was she too warm, too cold? Was that cry normal or a sign of some terrible undiagnosed illness? The questions swirled in Emma's mind, a constant barrage that left her exhausted and on edge. Mark found her like this, frozen in the rocking chair, her eyes wide and unfocused. "Em?" he said softly, approaching cautiously. "Everything okay?" Emma blinked, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Fine," she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just thinking." Mark's brow furrowed with concern. He'd been watching his wife retreat further into herself with each passing day, unsure how to help. "Why don't I take Lily for a bit? You could use a break." The suggestion sent a jolt of panic through Emma. The thought of being separated from Lily, even for a moment, made her chest tighten. What if something happened? What if Lily needed her? "No," she said, too quickly and too loudly. Lily stirred in her arms, and Emma instinctively began to rock, shushing softly. "No," she repeated, a little more calm this time. "We're fine. I've got this." Mark hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but eventually nodding and left the room. Emma watched him go, a mixture of relief and guilt washing over her. She loved her husband, but lately, his presence only seemed to highlight her own inadequacies as a mother. He was so natural with Lily, so confident. Why couldn't she feel that way? The days blurred together, a haze of feedings, diaper changes, and stolen moments of fitful sleep. Emma went through the motions, taking care of Lily's physical needs with robotic efficiency. But the emotional connection she'd expected to feel remained elusive, buried beneath layers of anxiety and self-doubt. One particularly difficult morning, after a night of almost no sleep, Emma found herself sobbing in the kitchen, Lily wailing in her bassinet nearby. She couldn't do this. She wasn't cut out for motherhood. Lily deserved better. The sound of the mailbox flap clanging shut startled her out of her spiral. Wiping her eyes, Emma went to retrieve the mail, Lily now hiccuping softly in her arms. Among the bills and advertisements was a brightly colored flyer. New Mothers Support Group. You're not alone. Join us every Tuesday at the community center. Emma stared at the flyer, her emotions a tangle of longing and fear. The thought of leaving the house, of facing other people, sent a tremor through her body. But a tiny voice in the back of her mind whispered that maybe this could help. Carefully, she pinned the flyer to the refrigerator. She wasn't ready. Not yet. But having it there felt like a lifeline, a possibility she wasn't quite ready to dismiss. Another week passed. Each day was a battle against the rising tide of anxiety. Emma found herself standing before the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the pale, drawn face staring back at her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her once vibrant brown hair hung limp and unwashed. "This isn't you," she whispered to her reflection. "This is not the mother Lily needs." Taking a deep breath, Emma made a decision. She could not go on like this. For Lily's sake, for her own sake, she had to try something different. Tuesday morning found Emma standing outside the community center, Lily strapped securely to her chest in a baby carrier. Her palms were sweaty, and she could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. Twice she nearly turned back, the urge to retreat to safety of her own home almost overwhelming. But then Lily stirred, nuzzling against her chest, and Emma found the strength to push open the door. The room was bright and welcoming, a circle of chairs arranged in a center. Several women were already seated, some with babies in their arms, others pregnant and round. A gentle hum of conversation filled the air, punctuated by the occasional coos and gurgles from the infants. "Welcome!" A woman with kind eyes and a warm smile approached. "I'm Jessica, the group facilitator. Is this your first time joining us?" Emma nodded, unable to find her voice. Jessica's smile widened. "Well, we are so glad you're here. Why don't you take a seat? We're about to get started." As Emma settled into a chair, she felt the familiar wisps of anxiety creeping up. What if Lily started crying? What if the other mothers judged her? What if... "All right, ladies," Jessica's voice cut through Emma's spiraling thoughts. "Let's begin by introducing ourselves and sharing one challenge we've faced this week. Remember, this is a safe space, no judgment, only support." One by one, the women began to speak. Emma listened, amazed as they shared their stories that could have been pulled from her own experiences. Sleepless nights, feelings of inadequacy, overwhelming fear. She wasn't alone. When it was her turn, Emma took a shaky breath. "I'm Emma," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And this is Lily. She's 6 weeks old, and She paused, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm terrified all the time. I can't shake the feeling that I'm doing everything wrong, and I'm not the mother she deserves. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Emma braced herself for judgment or dismissal. Instead, she was met with nods of understanding and murmurs of encouragement. "Oh, honey," an older woman with silver-streaked hair said gently, "we've all been there. It does get better, I promise." For the next hour, Emma listened and gradually began to share more. The women swapped stories, offered advice, and most importantly, provided validation for the complex emotions of new motherhood. By the end of the session, Emma felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She wasn't magically cured, but for the first time since Lily's birth, she felt hopeful. As the weeks passed, Emma found herself looking forward to the Tuesday meetings. She began to form friendships with the other mothers, exchanging text messages and meeting for coffee outside of the group sessions. Slowly, she started to reconnect with the world beyond her anxiety. At home, things began to shift as well. Emma still had moments of panic, still questioned her decisions, but she now had tools to cope. She practiced the breathing exercises Jessica had taught them, repeated the affirmations the group had crafted together, and when things felt overwhelming, she reached out to her new support network. 3 months after her first group meeting, Emma stood in the nursery, watching Lily babble happily in her crib. A smile, a genuine and warm smile, spread across her face. The anxiety wasn't gone completely. She was learning it might always be part of her journey as a mother, but it no longer controlled her. Emma leaned down, scooping Lily into her arms. "What do you say we go to the park today, little one?" she asked, nuzzling her daughter's soft cheek. "I think we could both use some fresh air." As they stepped out into the sunshine, Emma felt a sense of pride and accomplishment wash over her. She was doing it, one day at a time, one step at a time. She was becoming the mother she wanted to be, and she wasn't doing it alone. The invisible storm that had clouded the early days of her motherhood was finally beginning to clear, revealing a landscape of love, growth, and endless possibilities. Emma hugged Lily close, breathing in the sweet scent of her baby's hair. They had a long journey ahead, full of challenges and joys. But now, Emma felt ready to face it. Not fearlessly, perhaps, but with courage, support, and an ever-growing confidence in her ability to weather any storm. Rachel Marshall stood at the kitchen window, her fingers drumming an anxious rhythm on the countertop, as she watched her 10-year-old son, Blake, ride his bike in circles around their driveway. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, and Rachel found herself checking her watch compulsively. Only 15 more minutes of outdoor time, she told herself. Then Blake would be safely back inside, away from the dangers that seemed to lurk around every corner. Rachel was 38 and had always been a cautious parent, but the past year had sent her anxiety spiraling to new heights. It started with a near miss. Blake had almost been hit by a car while crossing the street to visit a friend. The driver had been texting, distracted for just a moment, but it was enough to send Rachel's world into a tailspin. Since that day, Rachel's mind had become a constant whirlwind of what-ifs. What if Blake fell off his bike and hit his head? What if a stranger approached him while he was playing outside? What if? What if? What if? The sound of laughter drifted through the open window. Blake had been joined by the neighbor's kid, Max. Rachel watched as they talked excitedly, no doubt planning some new adventure. "Mom," Blake called out, his face flushed with excitement. "Can Max and I ride our bikes to the park?" Rachel felt her chest tighten, her breath catching in her throat. The park was only 3 blocks away, a trip Blake had made countless times before. But now, the short distance seemed insurmountable, 1,000,000 times more dangerous than it had ever been before. "Not today, honey," she called back, hating the disappointment that flashed across her son's face. "It's almost dinner time. Maybe this weekend we can all go together." Blake's shoulders slumped, but he nodded. He was most definitely used to this response by now. Rachel watched as he said goodbye to Max, who was now riding off with a freedom that made her both envious and uncomfortable. As Blake trudged inside, Rachel busied herself with dinner preparations, trying to shake off the gnawing guilt she felt. She knew she was being overprotective, knew she was limiting Blake's experiences. But the thought of losing the reins, of allowing him more independence, sent waves of panic through her body. So much so that she would actually experience heart palpitations because of it. That night, after Blake was asleep, Rachel's husband David found her sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of tea clutched in her hand. "Rough day?" he asked gently, taking a seat beside her. Rachel sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I did it again," she admitted. "I kept him from going to the park with Max. I couldn't bear the thought of him being out there where I couldn't see him." David reached out, covering her hand with his own. "Rach, we've talked about this. Blake needs to have some more freedom. We cannot keep him in a bubble forever." "I know," she whispered, tears stinging at her eyes. "I know it's not rational, but every time I think about letting him go, I see that car coming towards him. I imagine all the terrible things that could happen, and I just freeze." David squeezed her hand. "Have you given any more thought about talking to someone? A therapist could help you work through this anxiety." Rachel pulled away, a familiar defensiveness rising within her. "I'm not crazy, David. I'm just trying to keep our son safe." "I never said you were crazy," David replied, his voice tight with frustration. "But this is not healthy. Not for you, and not for Blake either." Rachel stood abruptly, needing to escape the conversation. "I'm going to bed," she said, leaving David alone in the kitchen. As she lay in bed, unable to sleep, Rachel's mind wandered to her own childhood. She remembered the freedom she had, biking all over the neighborhood, walking to school alone, spending entire days exploring with friends. When had the world become so dangerous? Or had it always been this way, and she'd just been blissfully unaware? The next few weeks saw Rachel's anxiety intensify. She began insisting on driving Blake to and from school, despite it being a short walk away. Playdates were carefully monitored, outdoor time strictly limited. She found herself checking on him multiple times during the night, irrationally afraid that he might somehow vanish from his bed. Blake, for his part, grew increasingly withdrawn. The vibrant, adventurous boy he had once been was now fading into a quieter, more hesitant child. He stopped asking to go places or do things, knowing the answer would likely be no anyway. What was the point? The breaking point came on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Rachel was helping Blake with a school project when the doorbell rang. It was Max and a few other neighborhood kids, all on their bikes. "Can Blake come with us to the new ice cream shop?" Max asked, his eyes bright with excitement. My mom said she'd meet us there and bring us all home. Before Rachel could respond, she saw the look on Blake's face, a mix of longing and resignation that broke her heart. In that moment, she realized the true cost of her fear. She wasn't just protecting Blake, she was suffocating him. "Give us a few minutes to get ready," Rachel heard herself say, surprising both Blake and herself. "He'll be right out." As she helped Blake find his helmet and shoes, Rachel felt a war raging inside her. Every instinct screamed to keep him home, safe under her watchful eye. But the joy on his face and the spring in his step told her that this was the right decision. "Be careful," she said as Blake mounted his bike. "Stay with the group and listen to Max's mom." "I will," Blake promised, his smile bigger than she'd seen in months. "Thanks, Mom." Rachel stood in the driveway long after Blake had disappeared around the corner, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if to hold back the tide of anxiety threatening to overwhelm her. She'd done it. She'd let him go. But the fear remained, whispering worst-case scenarios in her mind. When David came home and found her still standing there, tears streaming down her face, he didn't say a word. He simply held her. Understanding the monumental, terrifying step she had taken. "I need help," Rachel whispered into his shoulder. "I can't keep doing this to him, or to myself." In the weeks that followed, Rachel began seeing a therapist specializing in anxiety disorders. It wasn't easy. Confronting her fears, learning to distinguish between reasonable caution and irrational panic was a daily struggle. There were setbacks, days when she wanted nothing more than to pull Blake close and never let go. But slowly, incrementally, things began to change. Rachel learned coping mechanisms, ways to calm the storm of anxious thoughts. She forced herself to take small steps, letting Blake walk to a friend's house alone, allowing him to ride his bike to the park without her hovering nearby. Each time Blake returned home safely, each time he shared an exciting story about his day, Rachel felt a little bit of her anxiety's stranglehold loosen. She began to rediscover the joy of watching her son grow and explore, even as the instinct to protect him remained strong. One evening, as Rachel watched Blake chatting excitedly about his day at the dinner table, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. There was still fear there, a thread of anxiety that she suspected would always be part of her. But alongside it was something else: pride, love, and a growing confidence in both Blake's abilities and her own strength to face her fears. "Hey, Mom," Blake said, breaking into her thoughts. "Can I join the after-school soccer club? Practice would be twice a week, and I'd need to take the late bus home." Rachel took a deep breath, feeling the familiar flutter of anxiety. But this time, she didn't let it control her. "Let's talk about the details," she said, smiling at the hope blooming on Blake's face. "I think we could probably make that work." As Blake launched into an excited explanation of the soccer club, Rachel caught David's eye across the table. He gave her a subtle nod, pride and support clear in his eyes. They still had a long way to go, but the invisible fence of fear that had enclosed their family was finally beginning to come down. Rachel knew there would always be risks, always be reasons to worry, but she was learning that there was also joy, growth, and amazing experiences waiting on the other side of fear. Step by step, day by day, she was finding the courage to embrace them, for Blake's sake and her own. Michael stood in front of his closet staring at a suit he had not worn in 8 years. The fabric felt foreign under his fingers, a relic from a past life. At 45 years old, he was preparing to step back into a world he'd left behind when his daughter Zoe was born. The decision to be a stay-at-home dad had come naturally. His wife, Olivia, had a thriving career as a surgeon, and they both agreed that having a parent at home would be best for Zoe. Michael had embraced the role wholeheartedly, finding joy and purpose in the daily rhythms of parenting. But now, with Zoe in 3rd grade and becoming more independent, Michael felt an itch he couldn't ignore. The part of him that had once thrived in a fast-paced world of marketing was awakening, like a limb coming back to life after being asleep. As he buttoned up his shirt, Michael caught sight of himself in the mirror. Gray had crept into his temples, and laugh lines framed his eyes. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. Not quite the young professional he had once been, but not just Zoe's dad either. "You've got this," he muttered, adjusting his tie. But the words felt hollow, drowned out by the rack of doubt swirling in his mind. Downstairs, Olivia was already at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up as Michael entered, her eyes widened slightly. "Wow," she said, a smile playing at her lips. "Look at you, Mr. Corporate." Michael attempted a confident grin, but it felt more like a grimace. "Does it look okay?" "I feel like I'm playing dress-up." Olivia stood, crossing the room to straighten his tie. "You look great," she assured him. "Are you ready for your meeting with Jack?" Jack was an old college friend who had offered to help Michael network and explore job opportunities. The meeting was just informal coffee, but to Michael, it felt like he was about to step onto a high wire without a safety net. "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied, his voice betraying his nerves. Olivia squeezed his hand. "You've got this. Remember, you haven't just been sitting around for 8 years. You've been managing a household, organizing school events, juggling a million responsibilities. Those are valuable skills." Michael nodded, trying to absorb her confidence, but as he drove to the cafe where he was meeting Jack, doubts crept in like an insidious fog. What if he'd forgotten how to talk about anything other than kids and household management? What if the industry had changed so much he was hopelessly outdated? The cafe was bustling with morning commuters. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and the sound of clacking laptops. Michael spotted Jack at the corner table, looking every inch the successful executive he was in his crisp suit. "Mike!" Jack stood, greeting him with a warm handshake. "Great to see you, man. You look good." Michael forced a smile, acutely aware of how out of place he felt. As they sat down, he fought the urge to talk about Zoe's recent school play or the new organization system he had implemented for the family's schedule, topics that had been the center of his world for so long. "So," Jack began, leaning forward, "tell me what you're looking for. What kind of position interests you?" Michael opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. His mind went blank. Years of marketing expertise seemingly evaporated. He felt like a fraud, an imposter trying to reclaim a life that no longer belonged to him. I'm not sure," he finally managed, hating how uncertain he sounded. "Everything's changed so much. I don't even know if I'm qualified for anything anymore." Jack's expression softened. "Mike, take a breath. You haven't lost your skills. They've just been applied differently for a while. Let's break this down." Over the next hour, Jack helped Michael translate his years as a stay-at-home parent into marketable skills. Time management, conflict resolution, budget planning, event organization, all things Michael had mastered in his role as a dad. As they talked, Michael felt something shift inside of him. The anxiety was still there, a constant undercurrent, but alongside it grew a tentative hope. Maybe he wasn't as out of touch as he had feared. "Listen," Jack said as they were wrapping up. "I've got a friend at a boutique marketing firm. They are looking for someone with fresh perspectives. It might be a good fit for you. Want me to set up an introduction?" Michael hesitated. Part of him wanted to say no, to retreat to the safety of his former routines. But a larger part, the part that had been quietly yearning for this chance, pushed him forward. "Yeah," he answered, "I'd like that." As he drove home, Michael's mind raced with a mix of uncertain excitement. He wasn't naive enough to think that one good conversation had erased all his doubts. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with moments of uncertainty and self-doubt. But for the first time in years, he felt a spark of the passion that had once driven his career. He realized that he wasn't trying to reclaim his old life, but to forge a new one that combined the skills and confidence he had gained as a parent with the professional aspirations he'd set aside. At home, he found Zoe at the kitchen table, working on homework. She looked up as he entered, her eyes widening at his unusual attire. "Dad?" she asked, curiosity in her voice. "Are you going to start working like Mom?" Michael sat down next to her, choosing his words carefully. "I'm thinking about it," he said. "How would you feel about that?" Zoe considered for a moment. "Will you still be here when I get home from school?" "Maybe not every day," Michael admitted, "but I'll always be here for you. We might just have to adjust a little." Zoe nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, "as long as you still make pancakes on Saturdays." Michael laughed, feeling some of the tension from the day melt away. "Deal," he said, pulling her into a hug. That night, as he hung the suitcase back into his closet, Michael felt a mix of emotions. The anxiety about re-entering the workforce was still there. He suspected it always would be, at least for a while. But alongside it was a growing sense of excitement and purpose. He wasn't just a stay-at-home dad. He wasn't just a marketing professional. He was both, and more. The challenge now was to find a way to blend these two parts of himself into something new. As he climbed into bed, Olivia rolled over, blinking sleepily. "How did it go?" she murmured. Michael was quiet for a moment. "It was scary," he finally said. "And it's going to keep being scary for a while. But I think I'm ready for this." Olivia smiled, squeezing his hand. "I'm proud of you," she said, "and we're in this together." As Michael drifted off to sleep, he felt like gears that had long been still were slowly beginning to turn again. They were rusty, yes, and the movements weren't smooth yet, but they were moving, and for now, that was enough. The journey ahead would be full of challenges, moments of self-doubt, and steep learning curves. But Michael was beginning to see that his years at home hadn't left him behind. They had prepared him in ways he was only starting to understand. As he stood at the threshold of his new chapter, he was nervous, yes, but also quietly, cautiously excited to discover what he was capable of. As our time together comes to a close, I want to thank you for joining us at Storyloft. The 3 stories we've shared about people living with anxiety remind us of the quiet strength we all carry within. To each person listening, whether these stories reflect your own experiences or have opened your heart to others, your presence here is a gift. You've helped create a gentle, understanding space just by listening. Storyloft is a peaceful corner where we can share our truths without fear. If you have a story you would like to share, we are here to listen with open hearts. You can reach us at storyloft@outlook.com. You'll find this address waiting for you in the description below. When you like and subscribe, you're not just supporting a channel, you're helping to grow a community of kindness. Each small action ripples outwards, potentially reaching someone who needs to hear that they are not alone. As we part ways, remember that your journey, with all its challenges and triumphs, is deeply meaningful. You matter, and your presence in this world is important. Be gentle with yourself. Know that we are here holding a quiet space for you whenever you need to return. Until next time, may you find moments of peace and know that you are cared for, just as you are.